I hereby declare open the 55th session of the Human Rights Council. President of the General Assembly, Secretary General of the United Nations, High Commissioner for Human Rights, Director General of the United Nations Office at Geneva, Head of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland, Excellencies, dear participants. We are opening this session while our world is facing severe conflict and crises of various natures impacting the daily life of populations and countries. I do hope that during this session we will find common understandings so that the Council manage to fulfill its duties in the best manner and be engaged constructively to limit the impacts of the different crises we are confronting and which are affecting numerous victims in all regions of the world. At the beginning of the session, and to fully focus on such situations and their consequences, I call the Council to observe a minute of silence on the memory of all victims of human rights violations worldwide. Allow me to pronounce my opening statements. سيد رئيس الجمعية العامة سيد الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة
President of the General Assembly, Secretary General of the United Nations, High Commissioner for Human Rights, Director General of the United Nations Office at Geneva, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants. On the occasion of the inauguration of the high-level session of the Human Rights Council, I'd like to thank all eminent personalities who've come in such large numbers to Geneva. It shows the role of the Human Rights Council in the multilateral regime. It also highlights the importance that we give to enhancing human rights and its protection, since this is the pillar of our societies and guarantees international peace and security.
Commissaire aux droits de l'homme, Madame la
Human Rights Commissioner, Excellencies, distinguished participants. Human rights are indivisible, indissociable, and inherent to all people. That is why I want to reaffirm the importance of an equal balance between civil and political rights, as well as economic, social, and cultural rights. It is only by preserving this defining principle that we can best respond to the challenges that we face, and of which I'd particularly like to highlight today as follows. I beg your pardon. Issues of food security, health security, and the climate crisis, or the environment more generally. These issues lie at the heart of our concerns. Both their root causes and their ramifications have an impact on the enjoyment and sustainability of human rights, as well as the equilibria of our world. Similarly, access to new technologies, to progress enabled by artificial intelligence, its utilization, which is marked by the digital divide, are likely to impact the equitable enjoyment of these rights by individuals. Growing attention must be observed at the level of the Human Rights Council on these issues, which merit action by members and all actors concerned, including by the Presidency, which has conducted related initiatives with the support of member states and the co-facilitators, working already with commitment to that end. Being a subsidiary body of the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council nevertheless remains the central United Nations actor responsible for promotion and protection of human rights. And I want to stress this, it has always, as far as possible, discharged this crucial task in spite of difficulties linked to geopolitical tensions which impact these works and which need to be adjusted to all those challenges. That is why I am convinced that reform of this body, as anticipated, is of paramount importance with a view to maintaining the trust of states, of civil society and other partners in their leading role through faithful assessment and accurate assessment of the positive achievements and gaps to be bridged, particularly when it comes to effectiveness and efficiency of work. To my mind, it would be judicious if the perspective of Member States and Council observers over the reform process be clearly established to best serve the decision to be taken by the General Assembly by 2026 in line with schedule.
General Assembly, Mr. Secretary General of United Nations, Mr. High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mrs. Director General of the United Nations Office at Geneva, Mr. Head of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland, Excellencies, dear participants. It is important for me to raise the severe impact of the liquidity crisis that the United Nations is experiencing on the conduct of the Council's work, as well as on the work of the mandate holders and the Council's mechanisms. In terms of flexibility in the organization of meetings and hybrid modalities of participation, which have demonstrated their great usefulness to states and civil society alike. The 55th session of the Human Rights Council is the longest since the Council's creation. It will bring with it numerous challenges and issues that we must overcome in a spirit of trust, respect, and serenity. The main objective of the Council session must be and remain achieving concrete advances in the field of human rights. In conclusion, I would like to assure you that the Presidency and the esteemed members of the Bureau are always ready to listen to your comments and give due consideration to your initiatives. I thank you for your kind attention. We will now listen to statements as planned for our the introductory of our high-level segment. The statements by the President of the 78th session of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Denis Francis, then the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, the United Nations High Commissioner of Human Rights, Mr. Volker, and the Head of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland, His Excellency Mr. Ignacio, representing the host country. Excellencies, dear participants, I now have the honor to give the floor to the President of the 78th session of the General Assembly. Your Excellency, you have the floor. Thank you.
Your Excellency Omar Znaiba, President of the Human Rights Council, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Volker Turk, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Excellencies, distinguished participants. It is truly a personal delight for me to be back in Geneva and here at the historic Palais des Nations to participate in this 55th session of the Human Rights Council. At the outset, I should like to extend my warm congratulations to you, Mr. President, and to the other Bureau members for their deserved election, and I wish you every success for the sessions ahead. Succeed we must under your able leadership. 75 years after the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, humanity's cherished Magna Carta, it is deeply concerning that human rights are under grave and increasing threat around the world. Conflicts, climate impacts, including the existential threat of sea level rise and other drivers, have left a staggering 300 million people in dire need of humanitarian assistance, some 114 million of them being refugees and other displaced peoples. In the Gaza Strip, the suffering of innocent civilians has reached an unbearable tipping point, with over 90% of the population displaced, teetering on the brink of starvation, and trapped in the depths of an impending, though avoidable, public health catastrophe. As the all too familiar cycle of war persists, the most vulnerable suffer the most. Hostages and their families are living in anguish. Women and children are facing desperate and uncertain futures, and innocent civilians are unjustly caught in life-threatening crossfire. The war in Ukraine, now in its third year, has only grown more entrenched, with no foreseeable sign of cessation in the short term. Haiti has descended into lawlessness, while persistent violence across Yemen, Sudan, Myanmar, and elsewhere has exacerbated the human rights situation with deepening concern. In the Sahel, the impact of strife and environmental stressors has led to a resurgence of famine, jeopardizing the right to food and proper nutrition for millions. And across the globe, threats to democracy and the rise of authoritarianism have impacted everything, from freedom of speech and movement to denial of education for girls and access to due process by many others. These events, which can only be described as regressive, have called into question the depth of our commitment to the very principles we swore to uphold 75 years ago, namely that human rights are universal, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. And above all else, being universal, they are applicable to and must be enjoyed by all in equal measure without exception. As President of the General Assembly, my message to you today is simple and unequivocal. We must not fail the victims of human rights violations. We must never tolerate or ignore the flagrant disregard for the rights and freedoms our forebearers worked so arduously to define and to codify. Nor should we ignore the systemic impunity with which it is perpetrated. In the name of humanity, we, the United Nations, must vehemently use our commanding platforms to speak up and to speak out louder in demand for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and for the opening of corridors to render urgently needed assistance and care to the 1.5 million displaced and unhoused Palestinians. Furthermore, I implore donor states to uphold and sustain their contributions to the critical funding necessary for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, to discharge its mandated responsibilities to the Palestinians. Even in the midst of the current extraordinary challenges, UNRWA has been and continues to be an indispensable lifeline to support the Palestinians. Across the globe, the inhuman brutality and suffering must stop. We must not simply stand by as callous observers, lest we be seen as complicit in the expanding web of dehumanization. No, we must do our part. The decisive role of this August Council is crucial in our collective efforts. I hold firmly to my beliefs that systems of entrenched inequality cannot be dismantled without honestly confronting the legacies of past injustices. Next month, in the General Assembly, we will mark the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery, as well as the International Day for the Ill, to acknowledge the debilitating legacy of suffering by people of African descent derived from chattel slavery. We must reassert our resolve to root out structural racism, poverty, and pervasive inequality. And on 17th April, I will convene a high-level commemorative meeting to mark the 10th anniversary of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. This session, the negotiations will continue on enhancing the participation of Indigenous peoples' representatives and institutions in relevant United Nations meetings and conferences. The upcoming 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States and the General Assembly's high-level meeting on addressing the existential threats posed by sea level rise will provide much-needed platforms to raise awareness about the interlinkages between climate crisis and human rights. Another critical discussion during this session will focus on the role of the Ombudsman and mediator institutions in the promotion and protection of human rights, good governance, and the rule of law. As a gender champion myself, I will continue my advocacy for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls throughout my presidency, working in close consultation with my advisory board and with my special advisor on this issue. Because the cold reality is that we continue to witness frightening setbacks in the recognition of and respect for the rights of women and girls. Harmful practices visited upon the female of the species and often rationalized in cultural terms, including child marriage and female genital mutilation, remain prevalent. Meanwhile, women remain significantly underrepresented in positions of power and influence. Around the world, we see them deprived of even the most basic rights, including the right to an education, with decisive consequences for themselves and for the society as a whole. While I welcome recent news that a cohort of female secondary school graduates in Afghanistan will be, quote unquote, permitted to attend medical school, such piecemeal steps fall far short of the progress that all Afghan women deserve. That is, their right to full and equal access to education and the full and equal participation in all spheres of community life. Gender equality must therefore be dealt with as a matter of moral urgency in Afghanistan and elsewhere. We cannot meaningfully achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and close the inequality gap between North and South while effectively marginalizing half of humanity from actively participating in all spheres of economic, political, and social activity. In order to promote a more equal, inclusive, and respectful workplace at the UN and beyond, it pleases me to advise that in conjunction with UN Women and your good self, Mr. President of the Human Rights Council, I am launching a training program here in Geneva to help prevent sexual harassment and to promote gender equality in the workplace. I note with pleasure that this year's high-level panel discussion on human rights mainstreaming in the Council focuses on the rights of persons with disabilities and their effective participation and inclusion in society. We need to make better progress in promoting the rights of persons with disabilities and in strengthening mechanisms for a more inclusive United Nations, respecting our own edict of leaving no one behind. In that regard, I am committed to intensifying the effort to promote and to achieve the full participation of persons with disabilities in the work of the UN. The onus is upon us to work across sectors and borders with all stakeholders to collectively deliver the desired outcomes. For my part, I continue to work to strengthen the engagement of civil society in the UN's work. And to that end, I'm looking forward to meeting with Geneva-based civil society representatives tomorrow. This is all the more important as we look ahead to the Summit of the Future in September, where world leaders are expected to reaffirm a shared commitment to recapture the unity and strength of our currently beleaguered multilateral system, one that can effectively respond to the pressing issues of today while being fit for purpose in securing the priorities and meeting the challenges that confront future generations. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Eleanor Roosevelt once famously advised that human rights begin in small places. Years later, we must keep the spotlight on the small places, on the schools, hospitals, prisons, and other settings where rights are denied, where global attention has waned, and where solidarity has the transformative power of a lifetime. As I close, I urge you all to harness the enormous strength and credibility of this Council as a platform for focused dialogue and the joint search for solutions. Our undiminished faith in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and renewed commitment to the promotion and protection of all human rights must remain the eternal guidelight to achieving a brighter, rights-based future for all, everywhere. I thank you.
I thank you, Mr. President of the 78th General Assembly, for your declaration. And now I give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Mr. President of the Human Rights Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Human rights are the bedrock of peace. Today, both are under attack. We meet at a time of turbulence for our world, for people, and for human rights. First and foremost, conflicts are taking a terrible toll as parties to war trample on human rights and humanitarian law. At the local level and online, many communities are riven with violent rhetoric, discrimination, and hate speech. Add to that an information war, a war on the poor, and a war on nature. All these battles have one thing in common: they are a war on fundamental human rights. And in every case, the path to peace begins with full respect for all human rights, civil, cultural, economic, political, and social, and without double standards. Because building a culture of human rights is building a world at peace. I commend the critical contributions of the Human Rights Council towards this goal through its mandates and mechanisms and the response to evolving situations. Excellencies, our world is becoming less safe by the day. After decades of stable power relations, we are transitioning into an era of multipolarity. And this creates new opportunities for leadership and justice on the international stage. But multipolarity without strong multilateral institutions is a recipe for chaos. As powers compete, tensions rise. The rule of law and rules of war are being undermined. From Ukraine to Sudan to Myanmar, the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Gaza, parties to conflict are turning a blind eye to international law, the Geneva Conventions, and even the United Nations Charter. The Security Council is often deadlocked, unable to act on the most significant peace and security issues of our time. The Council's lack of unity on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and on Israel's military operations in Gaza, following the horrific terror attacks by Hamas on 7 October, has severely, perhaps fatally, undermined its authority. The Council needs serious reform to its composition and working methods. Nothing can justify humans' deliberate killing, injuring, torturing, and kidnapping of civilians, the use of sexual violence, and indiscriminate launching of rockets towards Israel. but nothing justifies the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. I invoked Article 99 for the first time in my mandate to put the greatest possible pressure on the Council to do everything in its power to end the bloodshed in Gaza and prevent escalation. But it was not enough. International humanitarian law remains under attack. Tens of thousands of civilians, including women and children, have been killed in Gaza. Humanitarian aid is still completely insufficient. Rafah is the core of the humanitarian aid operation, and UNRWA is the backbone of that effort. An all-out Israeli offensive on the city would not only be terrifying for more than 1 million Palestinian civilians sheltering there, it would put the final nail in the coffin of our aid programs. I repeat my call for a humanitarian ceasefire and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Excellencies, around the world, violence is increasing and conflict-related human rights violations are spreading. International human rights and humanitarian law are clear. All parties must distinguish between civilians and combatants at all times. Attacks on civilians or protected infrastructure, including schools and hospitals, are prohibited. Indiscriminate attacks are prohibited. Attacks where the likelihood of civilian death is disproportionate to the probable military advantage are prohibited. Forced displacement is prohibited. The taking and holding of hostages is prohibited. The use of civilian human shields is prohibited. Collective punishment is prohibited. The use of sexual violence as a weapon of war is prohibited. And violations by one party do not absolve the other from compliance. We cannot, we must not, become numb to appalling and repeated violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. All allegations of serious violations and abuses demand urgent investigation and accountability. And we are determined to take such action in relation to allegations against our own staff. Excellencies, the Geneva Conventions, which require the protection of civilians and the humane treatment of people in enemy hands, were not the result of an outbreak of global goodwill. These treaties were agreed because they protect everyone. Around the world, warring parties claim exemptions, asserting that certain people or situations are uniquely dangerous. But flouting international law only feeds insecurity and results in more bloodshed. Human rights conventions and humanitarian law are based on cold, hard reality. They recognize that terrorizing civilians and depriving them of food, water, and health care is a recipe for endless anger, alienation, extremism, and conflict. Today's warmongers cannot erase the clear lesson of the past. Protecting human rights protects us all. We urgently need a new commitment to all human rights, civil, cultural, economic, political, and social, as they apply to peace and security, backed by serious efforts at implementation and accountability. And states have the primary responsibility to protect and promote human rights. To support states in meeting their obligations, I am launching a system-wide United Nations Agenda for Protection together with the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Under the agenda, the United Nations, across the full spectrum of our work, will act as one to prevent human rights violations and to identify and respond to them when they take place. That is the protection pledge of all United Nations bodies to do their utmost to protect people. Excellencies, around the world, governments must step up and commit to working for peace and security rooted in human rights. The Summit of the Future in September is our opportunity for such a recommitment. The new agenda for peace to be discussed at the summit applies a human rights lens to preventing and ending violence in all its forms. Building on our call to action for human rights, it urges an end to reflexive responses to violence, underscoring the need for strategic, comprehensive approaches that address root causes. Successful peace processes, from Colombia to Northern Ireland, demonstrate that the full spectrum of human rights is indispensable to building peace. The new Agenda for Peace recognizes that security policies that ignore human rights can divide communities, exacerbate inequalities, and drive people towards extremism. It calls for all military engagement to respect human rights and humanitarian law and to be backed by political and development strategies. It urges security policies centred on people with the full and equal participation of women and the strong representation of young people. It calls for human rights to be at the heart of the governance of new weapons technologies, including artificial intelligence, and seeks the total prohibition of lethal autonomous weapons with the power to kill without human involvement. It affirms that human rights and humanitarian law apply in cyberspace, and it calls for much closer cooperation between the UN's human rights frameworks, the Security Council and the Peacebuilding Commission to address violations and put human rights at the core of peace operations. Excellencies, the new Agenda for Peace also addresses the links between human rights violations and violence at community level. From the epidemic of violence against women and girls, to the activities of criminal gangs, to rising anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim bigotry, the persecution of minority Christian communities, and discrimination against minorities of all kinds, many people do not feel safe in their own communities. Media workers and human rights defenders are frequently targeted, sometimes as part of a strategy to reduce civic space and silence criticism. Decades of progress on women's and girls' rights are being challenged and rolled back, including their fundamental right to education and health care and their sexual and reproductive rights. The new Agenda for Peace urges governments to create space in national security policies for civil society, human rights defenders, and those representing vulnerable and marginalized people. Freedom of the media, freedom of expression, and an open, inclusive civic space are essential to peaceful, democratic societies. It calls for the dismantling and transformation of power structures that discriminate against women and girls, and for concrete steps to secure women's full, equal and meaningful participation at all levels of decision-making on peace and security. And it presses for young people to be included as participants in decision-making on peace and security events. We are also setting our ways to tackle online abuses of human rights and support people's rights to connectivity and privacy online through our forthcoming Code of Conduct for Information Integrity and the Global Digital Compact. Peaceful communities require an open, secure, accessible digital public space that supports human rights and freedoms.
Excellencies, wars are not confined to the battlefield. Certain current economic policies at national and global level constitute a war on the poor and a war on their human rights. Numerous developing economies are still struggling to deal with the twin shock of the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The SDGs are far from being achieved. This year alone, the poorest countries in the world must disburse more than $185 billion to service their debt, or more than their total public spending on healthcare, education and infrastructure. The absence of a safety net when it comes to debt jeopardizes the capacity of millions of people to enjoy their rights, their right to potable water, nutritional food, education, healthcare and work. The global financial architecture lies at the heart of this crisis in human rights. It is obsolete, dysfunctional and unjust and must be reformed to provide long-term, low-cost financing and provide an effective safety net for all countries that need it. We call for the adoption of an SDG recovery plan at a level of $500 billion per year so that the developing countries can access affordable long-term financing. We also very much call for a new Bretton Woods to remodel the global financial architecture for it to reflect the world of today and not that of 80 years ago. The Summit of the Future will be an opportunity to envisage profound reforms to make the global financing frameworks more inclusive, equitable and just, so that it can help governments to prioritise social spending to sustainable development and to climate action, which is so crucial among human rights. The Global Social Summit and the International Conference on Financing for Development, which will take place next year, will place emphasis on how economic policies, including budgets, tax measures and subsidies, can enhance investment in the SDGs and in human rights for all, men and women alike. Excellencies, dear friends, our war on nature is a war against the human rights of the people who are among the most vulnerable in the world: indigenous peoples, rural communities, marginalized persons and the neediest. The crises afflicting our planet, including climate change, loss of diversity and pollution, carry within them the same profound injustice. It is the people who least contributed to these crises who are bearing the brunt and who are paying the highest price when it comes to aggravating hunger, famine, degradation of lands, of soil, forced displacement, contamination of water sources, or premature death. Recognizing the right to a clean, healthy, sustainable environment by the Human Rights Council in 2021 and by the General Assembly in 2022 shows that the times are changing. Environmental justice, climate justice are rallying calls for ethical, equitable treatment for the principle of responsibility and of human rights. Climate justice means that the G20 countries should show the way when it comes to the progressive elimination of fossil fuels. It means that all nationally determined contributions or national climate plans should be adjusted to the maximum limit of 1.5 degrees for the warming of the planet. It calls for an effective carbon price and an end to subsidies given to fossil fuels. Climate justice calls on the developed countries to deliver on their financial commitments to the developing economies, starting with that commitment to mobilize $100 million per year and to double financing for adaptation between now and 2025. Finally, it means that the loss and damage fund should be made operational as soon as possible and should start receiving significant contributions. For many countries in the South, economic, environmental and climate justice are the main challenge of our times when it comes to human rights. The United Nations joins them in calling on all countries to shoulder their responsibilities. Excellencies, our world is changing at a dizzying speed. The multiplication of conflicts are leading to unprecedented suffering, but human rights are a constant. They give cohesion to our quest for solutions. They are fundamental for our hopes for a world in peace. 4 years ago, the United Nations celebrated its 75th anniversary by launching a global survey. The citizens of the whole world declared by a vast majority that they wanted global leaders to prioritize human rights and to respect them. This call was echoed during celebrations of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights in December. This year, the Summit of the Future gives us an opportunity to respond to that call and to ensure that our global institutions should be in step with reality, which is constantly in constant flux today, and to fully adhere to the abiding values of human rights. Together, let us take this opportunity to further peace and human rights for everyone, women and men alike. I thank you.
Secrétaire général. Je remercie Monsieur le Secrétaire.
I would like to thank the Secretary General for his important statement. I now give the floor to the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Your Excellency, Mr. Volker Turk, you have the floor.
President of the General Assembly, Secretary General, President of the Human Rights Council, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. This Council enters into session at a time of seismic global shocks. Conflicts are battering the lives of millions of civilians and carving even deeper fault lines across and between nations. The pain and slaughter of so many people in the Middle East, Ukraine, Sudan, Myanmar, and Haiti, and so many other places around the world are unbearable. And when we discuss in the coming weeks, country by country, we must remember their faces and their anguish. At a time of such atrocious violations, is it naive to demand that all states uphold their human rights commitments? Or is it crucial, the most important, the most consequential, the most urgent task that any of us could possibly undertake? Are these not, in reality, our only guarantees, essential and profoundly rooted, anchoring our societies in the midst of turbulence? The 75 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was an important moment of reflection on the successes and failures to implement human rights and how we can do better in the future. This was the culmination of a rich, year-long engagement across the world, which resounded with demands that the world deliver on the promises of the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. Demands for action to end conflict, to eradicate discrimination, to heal our distorted economies and our battered environment, demands for quality services such as education and healthcare, for an end to corruption, for a voice in one's own future, and over again, demands that states change course to bring humanity the benefits of greater justice, more inclusive development, greater equality and peace. By the end of that two-day event, 153 member states had issued concrete pledges alongside civil society groups, UN bodies, businesses and others. Over 770 pledges in all. They ranged from commitments to increase women's leadership and employment equality, to tackling extreme poverty, ensuring transitional justice, and improving access to education, healthcare, and social protections. Just as important was the outpouring of support from members of the public in every corner of the globe. The Open Society Barometer, a survey of over 36,000 people in 30 countries, found that the vast majority agreed that human rights have been a force for good. In other words, the silent majority holds to the human rights principles that ensure progress and justice across all societies and which keep our world safe. Today, I'm pleased to launch Human Rights, A Path for Solutions, which is the distillation of this hard work that has gone into the commemoration year in the hope that it will inform the Summit of the Future. This Path for Solutions sets out 8 key messages to guide renewed action for peace, economies that work for people and planet, effective governance, and guardrails for digital and scientific progress. It broadens the way we think about human rights in ways that can transform our societies and our global community. The Secretary-General's announcement of the UN's Protection Pledge and the Agenda for Protection will ensure that the entire UN gives priority to human rights, to advancing human rights in every circumstances, no matter how challenging. I look forward to working with colleagues across the UN to implement this pledge. I will address various country situations throughout this Council session, and in particular when I deliver the global update next Monday. But this morning I would like to flag 2 overarching concerns that have potential impact on all countries. First, Negotiations on treaties on pandemic prevention and on cybercrime, as well as on plastic pollution, and global discussions about the regulation of artificial intelligence, all these talks are currently underway, but they are not sufficiently taking into account human rights obligations and the human rights harms that could be done. Second, I'm disturbed by attempts to undermine the legitimacy and work of the United Nations and other institutions. They include disinformation that targets UN humanitarian organizations, UN peacekeepers, and my office. The UN has become a lightning rod for manipulative propaganda and a scapegoat for policy failures. This is profoundly destructive of the common good, and it callously betrays the many people whose lives rely on it. The UN is uniquely equipped to enable states to discuss and resolve pressing global issues. And this convening power is particularly vital now when the magnitude of conflict, planetary peril, and digital transformation requires urgent solutions. UN humanitarian agencies assist hundreds of millions of people to stay alive. The UN's development and peace work is absolutely crucial to all nations. My office is mandated to monitor and report on human rights because states have agreed that rights and justice are the best and only way forward. The work of opening dialogues, keeping communication channels alive, and protecting rights is not comfortable for everyone, but it is essential to all of us. We need to overcome the binary view that if you are not for us and against our enemies, then you too must be an enemy. Within countries, the us versus them illogic is creating increasingly dangerous and combustible divisions, especially in pre-electoral periods, of which we all know there are many this year. All this is a politics of distraction, of warmongering, which slowly numbs our deepest sense of compassion. Especially at a time of division and fear, seeing the humanity in the other is the lifeline that can tug us away from disaster. I draw strength and hope from last year's powerful tributes to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the testimonies we heard from so many people around the globe, and the significant pledges that were made. The power of human rights is rooted in their universality, the equal value of every human life that is at their core. The same human rights standards must be deployed everywhere, and they must be benchmarks for future progress, not high watermarks from which we can recede. Every human being is born equal. All victims are equally deserving of justice. No one can be left behind, and nobody is above the law. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie Monsieur le
I thank the High Commissioner for his important statement.
Inviting His Excellency Mr. Ignacio Cassis, Head of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland, to make a statement on behalf of the host country. You have the floor, Mr. Councillor.
Monsieur le Président.
Sir, President of the Human Rights Council, Sir, President of the General Assembly, Sir, Secretary General, Sir, High Commissioner for Human Rights, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. May everyone be welcome here in Switzerland, in international Geneva, for this 55th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council. I would have liked to have welcomed you in a more favorable international context. Unfortunately, the reality of things is not as colorful as the beautiful ceiling in this room. And as with the stalactites of the work of Michel Barceló, I sometimes have the impression that the world is threatening to fall upon our heads. The war in Ukraine is in its third year. The conflict in the Middle East seems more than ever at loggerheads. The crisis in Sudan has put more than 8 million people on the road. And I'm merely mentioning 3 of the more than 50 open conflicts in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, according to the Swedish Institute Varieties of Democracy Institute, more than 70% of the global population is today living under autocracies. Democracy has slipped back to its mid-1980s levels. In seeing these numbers, I can't but think of George Orwell and his work, 1984. In 1984, Orwell paints a picture of a world in continuous war, inexisting freedoms, and manipulated freedom. The citizens are surveilled by Big Brother and Big Brother's totalitarian regime. It is truly not the world of which we dream in this room. We have the responsibility to put an end to this negative dynamic. As United Nations, we must courageously refuse dystopia, a world that is merely a reflection of our anguish and anxieties. Excellencies, were human rights to be respected by all, we would not be speaking of endless war. We must note that we are far from there that we wished to be 75 years ago. Despite all of the laws that we have enacted, our efforts seem to not have succeeded in bringing reason to triumph over violence. And yet, the countries united in this room have freely and knowingly agreed and decided to place freedom and dignity of individuals at the center of our work and attention. Is it a chimera to pursue the emancipation of each individual so that each individual can take on their responsibilities in their respective societies, in society on the whole? 2024 is an important test for democracy. Elections are slated to take place in more than 64 countries. Half of the global population has been called to the ballot box. A great many citizens will be called upon to avail themselves of their right to information, their freedom of expression, and the possibility of peaceful assembly. And we, as the United Nations, must ensure the protection of civic space. We must ensure free and fair elections. These conditions are essential. They are sine qua non for the outcome to truly reflect the will of the people. We must fight against targeted harassment and attacks seeking to shrink essential democratic space, and we must do so with all our might. We must give it our all. Ladies and gentlemen, these words of commitment must be followed by concrete and lasting action. Our credibility depends on it. It is for this reason that we are met here in Geneva. This year, my country is submitting its candidacy to become a member of this council. With our strong tradition of responsibility in the realms of humanitarian law and human rights law, we aspire to increasingly take on the challenge of our turbulent times. And everyone, men and women alike, in a spirit of cooperation, dialogue, sharing, and trust. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 months ago in this room, working together with the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This year, 2024, marks the 75th anniversary of the First Geneva Convention, the 75th anniversary of the Fourth Geneva Convention. If history shows us what we have been able to do for a world living in peace, history also shows us, through recent developments, that nothing is etched in stone. Nothing, neither fundamental rights nor peace. It is essential that we work together. This is our duty. This is humanity's task. I thank you.
I thank the head of the Foreign Affairs Department of Switzerland. Excellencies, distinguished participants. Before we proceed with the list of speakers for the high-level segment of this 55th session, let me remind you that this segment is scheduled to conclude on Wednesday, 28th of February, and will be immediately followed by the general segment. This year we have around 140 high-level dignitaries' participation from all regions in the world. As in past years, and in conformity with the Council's rules and practices, there is no possibility to interrupt a dignitary's statements by way of a point of order. All requests to exercise a right of reply relating to statements delivered during the high-level segment will be accommodated after the conclusion of the general statement. I wish to remind delegations that the speaking time is of 7 minutes for heads of states and heads of government and 5 minutes for all other participants in the high-level segment. I kindly ask all delegations to respect the speaking time. By adhering to your allocated time, you help other delegations to deliver their statements as scheduled. Concerning pre-recorded video statements, I wish to underscore that videos not received in good time will be rescheduled on an availability basis up to the last day of the segment. Excellencies, distinguished participants, I wish to take this opportunity to reiterate the importance I place on ensuring inclusivity on our work. It is essential that this Council provides a safe and inclusive space for all stakeholders to actively participate. In this regard, I wish to emphasize that acts of reprisals and intimidations against civil society, representative personal attacks against the Council mandates holders, and any form of harassment, including sexual harassment against any participant in the Council, will not be tolerated. In this regard, I am very pleased to be joining the President of the General Assembly and UN Women in the training initiative aimed at advancing gender equality and preventing sexual harassment in the workplace, as announced earlier by the President of the General Assembly. This initiative is part of our collective efforts to mainstream gender issues into the work of the United Nations and to promote a more equal, inclusive and respectful working environment at the United Nations and beyond. Thus, I encourage all permanent missions and permanent observers mission to the United Nations office at Geneva to join the pledge to have their delegates complete the United Nations online courses on gender equality and the prevention of sexual harassment. Excellencies, distinguished participants, let us now proceed with the list of speakers of the high-level segment. And thus, I will now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Santiago Peña Palacios, President of the Paraguay, by video message. Your Excellency, Mr. President, you have the floor.
Señor Presidente.
President of the Human Rights Council, Ambassador Omar Sneber, President of the General Assembly, Ambassador Denis Francis, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellency Antonio Guterres, Mr. High Commissioner of the Human Rights, Volker Turk, Excellencies, heads of state and government, distinguished representatives of member states and observers, distinguished representatives of entities, agencies and international organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to take this opportunity to address the Human Rights Council plenary as President of the Republic of Paraguay in this high-level segment, especially to reiterate the firm commitment of my country to contribute to this organ in a constructive, conciliative spirit based on the principles of openness, respect and equality, as well as fostering cooperation, dialogue and international solidarity. Congratulations to the President of the Council for his election, and I'm grateful to the membership for designating the Paraguay delegation one of the vice presidencies that lies with Latin America and the Caribbean. We are in complex, difficult times. The world faces extraordinary global challenges that require effective multilateralism as a key tool in conflict resolution. In 2024, as we end our period on the Council, we need to make sure that this multilateralism is not just in words, but that it should be in actions based on genuine cooperation. Therefore, it's important to recognize high levels of poverty, inequality within and among our countries, exacerbated during the recent pandemic, and crises related to lack of opportunities, international terrorism, transnational crime, and geopolitical tensions have highlighted weaknesses and limitations of the multilateral institutions in their capacity to confront global impact challenges and systemic risks. Similarly, climate change is another challenge that requires rigorous measures. At the same time, just measures in order to implement policies with a view to adaptation. Therefore, what we need is a more equitable approach that reflects the realities and specific needs of each country in establishing environmental protection measures. At the last COP, Paraguay reiterated its commitment to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, with emissions that represent only 0.1% of global emissions, with 44% of its territory covered by woods and 15% under forest areas. Our countries cannot renounce the opportunities for the economic growth and creation of jobs. We reiterate our commitment with a sustainable, balanced focus. At the same time, we will continue to defend with determination our right to development. In December last year, we marked the 75th anniversary of the UDHR, probably one of the most relevant instruments in the world, since it crystallized a historic process of social claims and global consensus that placed at its center the human person and his rights. While there being the philosophical bedrock of numerous human rights instruments, we also welcome the event organized by OHCHR, and we call on it to take action to revitalize the principles of the Universal Declaration. With the culmination of the events of December, it's now time to put into practice the commitments of various global actors assumed to improve our future. The idea that all humans, without distinction, are equal before the law is the key pillar of the rule of law. Bolstering institutionality, integrity of governance, legal security and judicial effectiveness are key aspects when it comes to ensuring the full enjoyment of human rights. On that basis, we have presented commitments based on pillars that seek to bolster institutionality of policy in the fields of human rights, social protection of citizens, and technical cooperation, knowledge sharing when it comes to national implementation mechanisms in line with the follow-up recommendations on human rights. These goals go hand in hand with the recent launch of a national poverty reduction plan, that's called, as part of the social protection system in Paraguay, we seek to promote sustained economic growth that fosters, moreover, the creation of greater opportunities, reductions in inequality, improvements to quality of life and development. We want more jobs, more investment, and to use entrepreneurship to combat poverty. We are committed to creating favourable economic conditions for development, promoting investment, preserving financial stability and fostering the creation of jobs. We are intensifying our efforts to ensure opportunities for all. Paraguay has launched in the field of the Council's work, has fostered the strengthening of national implementation mechanisms, reporting and follow-up, focusing its efforts not just on the approval of resolutions, but also providing technical cooperation to other countries based on its own experience of our national mechanism called Simore Plus. In December, we carried out an official visit to the Kindred Republic of Chile. An agreement was signed to provide cooperation in this field. This year, we've already agreed the following steps to give substance to that same cooperation with Brazil. Ladies and gentlemen, establishment of this council met the need to have a mandated standing organ to consider and take action when human rights situations so require. We are concerned by human suffering in all parts of the world. We see with great sadness the grave consequences of terrorism in the Middle East. We call for a lasting peace in that region. Moreover, we reiterate our call for a cessation to the invasion of Ukraine and that in Venezuela that fair, transparent elections should be held. We also call for a return to democracy in Nicaragua. The presence of Paraguay in the Council has bolstered the positioning of its foreign policy in the field of human rights, and in that context we will continue to promote and to support debates addressing persisting and emerging problems both at national and international levels, with special focus on persons in situations of greatest vulnerability to whom we have a great debt. My country maintains its standing invitation to all HRC special mandate holders can visit Paraguay and cooperate with the promotion of rights with our peoples. We firmly believe that all people should be protected in their dignity and in their human rights. We must all contribute to this. In a message on Human Rights Day on 10th December 2020, Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General at the time, said that each one of us could make a concrete difference in someone's life, in schools, in our workplaces, in social networks, and in our homes. To that end, all countries and the Human Rights Council should continue consolidating and fine-tuning its working methodology with a view to optimizing its impact on people's lives. Paraguay will continue to invest maximum efforts with a view to achieving that goal. I thank you.
I thank you, Excellency, for your declaration. Et maintenant, je donne la parole au...
I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Prosper Bazambonza, the Vice President of Burundi. Excellency, you have the floor. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, Excellency Mr. Omar Sniber, President of the Human Rights Council, Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Volker Turk, High Commissioner for Human Rights at the United Nations, dear colleagues, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. First of all, I would like to present my heartfelt thanks and greetings to His Excellency of the President of the Burundi, who has done the honour, who I'm honoured to represent at this summit. I would next like to pay thanks to God the Almighty, who has allowed me to be in this city of human rights, to be here safe and sound here in Geneva, to take the floor at this high-level segment of the 55th session of the Human Rights Council, to debate issues of human rights, subjects that we all hold dear with a view to respecting human dignity throughout the world. Let me next express my heartfelt congratulations to His Excellency Mr. Omar Zneiber from the Kingdom of Morocco for his outstanding election as President of the Human Rights Council at its 18th cycle, covering the period from 1st January to 31st December 2024. His outstanding qualities and talent are a guarantee for the proper stewardship of our work underway this year. And we wish you every success. You can naturally count on the full cooperation of Burundi in discharging your noble uplifting mission. Similarly, I'd like to pay a deserved tribute to your predecessor, Ambassador Václav Bálek, not just for his admirable professional and personal qualities, but also for the excellent professional manner in which he presided the 17th cycle that we have just concluded with success in a context particularly favorable for Burundi, since my country submitted for is presented for the fourth cycle of its UPR in 2023 and was elected as a member of the Human Rights Council, having previously been so in 2018. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank once more all states who vested their trust in us. Moreover, let me commend the outstanding work of the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, as well as his valiant action underway to reform our organization, to improve its effectiveness and its credibility, and to bring the organization closer to the citizens of the world without any discrimination. Burundi renews to him its full support and cooperation in that respect. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, this 55th regular session of the Human Rights Council is a fine opportunity for Burundi to share with you the main projects of the government in the sphere of human rights. With respect to the country's state of security, I'm pleased to inform you that the socio-security situation in Burundi is stable, calm, and fully under control throughout the communes, the provinces, indeed the whole country. At a political level, Burundi is now very mature in the process of making peace and security sustainable, as well as in bolstering democracy, as borne out by the free, fair, democratic, transparent and calm elections organized with great alacrity in 2005, in 2010, in 2015 and in 2020. Rest assured also that the elections, legislative elections and local elections to be held next year in 2025 will be organized and will be a complete success with the financial support of the government of Burundi. With staying on the subject of good governance and social cohesion, next year we will be, as I said, holding legislative, local and district elections to be fully financed from our own resources. Comprehensive financing of the electoral process from national resources reflects the willingness of the Burundi people to take full ownership of the system of political, administrative and economic governance of our country. Now that all the foundations for consolidated democracy are present, all that is left now is to work towards development so as to combat poverty and to ensure stabilization of the national economy. At an economic level, during presentation of our report to the UPR last year in 2023, Burundi had an opportunity to to show that it had made its top priority the promotion and protection of human rights, combating poverty and social inequality through its strategic strategy that each mouth should be able to be fed and that each pocket should have money in it, should contain money, as repeated always by His Excellency President of Burundi, Mr. Evariste Ndayishimiye. Moreover, Burundi has developed a National Development Plan 2018-2027, which was updated in 2023 to bring it into line with the vision of Burundi as an emerging country by 2040 and a developed country by 2060, which is inspired from the Sustainable Development Goals and the African Union Agenda 2063. In order to combat human trafficking, Burundi has set up a dialogue and follow-up commission on prevention and combating of human trafficking in Burundi. In 2022, the department responsible for employment of migrants in 2021 and the Department on Migration and Labour Force, so as to give effect to the law on human trafficking of 2014. Along those lines, bilateral agreements on migration and workforce have been signed between Burundi and Saudi Arabia on the 3rd of October 2021, and with Serbia on the 15th of June 2022, as well as a national action plan against human trafficking 2023 to 2027, and a manual on standard operating procedures to combat human trafficking in Burundi of 2023. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, with respect to the right to a decent standard of living, Burundi has accelerated implementation of its policy of nyakatsi houses. In other words, houses made of straw, to eliminate these and to replace them with bricks, with houses made of brick, all fully covered with roofs, all containing social basic services, and to help the indigenous people, the Batwa, to better become settled. With regards to integration of the rights of disabled people and the elderly, my country has ratified the Protocol on the African Charter of Rights and Peoples on the rights of persons with disabilities in April 2022, and the Protocol to the African Charter on Human Rights and of Peoples with respect to the rights of older persons. These two ratifications are the culmination of efforts to promote and protect this category of individuals, in addition to efforts towards establishing the law and a national committee on the rights of persons with disabilities. At the same time, we would highlight that we very much look forward to the scheduling of the review of the initial Burundi report on implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities since 2020. In terms of climate, it's worth noting that the planet on which we live and on which generations to come will live faces a climate crisis which is worsening day in, day out, with the rise in climate skepticism. Burundi has not been spared by climate change linked to torrential rains and rising water levels of Lake Tanganyika, which has led to enormous material and human damage. To confront climate change, which has led to climate displacement, an action plan linked to the National Strategy for Risk Reduction and Disasters 2018 to 2025 is now operational, together with a National Emergency Operations Centre. Their mission is to coordinate the work of all state and non-state actors provided for in the National Contingency Plan during emergency rescue operations an emergency rescue operations plan has also been established. With respect to cooperation with international human rights mechanisms, Burundi continues to produce and to submit initial and periodic reports and to implement recommendations. Nevertheless, despite efforts made in promoting and protecting human rights, my government takes the opportunity to bemoan the conduct of certain states who continue to politicize human rights issues by pressurizing certain states, whereas in fact all states should be treated on an equal footing. After almost 10 years of Burundi paying the price of a politicization of human rights issues for geopolitical ends, we think that it's high time now to recognize that we have been abused, as we continue to demonstrate, indeed once again today, and as you will have noted yourselves. Similarly, we would like to clarify that we will never accept any special rapporteur being imposed on us. Moreover, we do not see its relevance, given that our country has institutions sufficiently responsible for promoting and protecting human rights, including the Minister of Human Rights. I would highlight here that the minister responsible for human rights in Burundi is indeed present in forum. The institution of the Ombudsman is there. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission is working. The National Independent Human Rights Commission, with its A status accreditation, is there. We have the National Observatory for the Prevention of Genocide, War Crimes and Other Crimes Against Humanity is working. The Centre for the Promotion of the Rights of Human Rights and Prevention of Genocide is there. The National Council for National Unity is there. The reinstitutional of the Council of District Elders are all organizations, state organizations, which are all up and running in the country specifically to support and respond to the concern of protecting human rights. President, in conclusion, I reiterate that my country, Burundi, believes in international solidarity, in multilateralism, and in rejecting diplomacy through coercion. My country therefore reaffirms its commitment to contributing to building a global order based on the rule of law, a peaceful, equitable, prosperous world, one that respects the principles of the UN Charter. I thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention, and may God be with you. Thank the Vice President of Burundi for his statement. I will now suspend the meeting for a couple of moments to escort the Secretary General and the President of the General Assembly, who must leave us to attend to other commitments. I thank you.
Merci. Nous allons donc reprendre.
So we will resume the meeting.
Now to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Murat Nurtlu, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Sure. Shall we proceed? Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I wish to thank United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres and High Commissioner Volker Türk for their strong leadership and promotion of human rights worldwide. I also congratulate Ambassador Omar Zniber of Morocco on assuming the presidency of the Human Rights Council and assure him of my delegation's full support. I'm pleased to address this Assembly and reiterate Kazakhstan's commitment to upholding human rights. Mr. President, if one country brings in positive changes, it is an add. But if we achieve it collectively, it would amplify our joint endeavors for the long-term prosperity and well-being of all. My country contributes to our shared values. It promotes our common goals and objectives at both national and international levels. Many of you are well aware about Kazakhstan's geographic location on the crossroads of East and West, North and South. It is also a home for more than 120 ethnic groups, and we are proud of the fact that our diversity is our strength and our special brand of multilateralism. As we chart this course, we recognize that human rights are not merely about political systems or institutions, but also about honoring and respecting the unique identities, opinions, and perspectives of all of our citizens. Mr. President, the ambitious reform agenda of the President of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, has launched an unprecedented and tremendous democratic processes. In a short span of time, we have fully reloaded our entire political and economic system. 4 comprehensive packages of political reforms have been successfully implemented over the past 4 years. Following public referendum, the first since 1995, we started a large-scale transformation of all government institutions. Our new formula, strong president, influential parliament, accountable government, has strengthened the system of checks and balances. 5 electoral processes have taken place in less than a year, including presidential, parliamentary, and local ones. The president's term in office was limited to a single 7-year period. Moreover, for the first time in our history, 6 political parties entered into the lower house of the parliament, including opposition parties. The human rights protection mechanisms have been significantly developed with the re-establishment of the Constitutional Court and enshrining of the status of the Commissioner for Human Rights in our Constitution. According to some international experts, all these undertakings are quite unique by their nature. Mr. President, the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights served as an occasion for member states to renew their commitments,
Symbolically, last year, Kazakhstan has ratified 2 optional protocols to the Conventions on the Rights of the Child and Persons with Disabilities. Just last week, the President has signed a new law on improving child protection and safety standards in schools. In line with these international commitments to ensuring the right of life and human dignity, Kazakhstan has abolished the death penalty, instituted a zero-tolerance policy against torture and ill treatment, and strengthened its national preventive mechanisms. Following our constructive dialogue with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, we have incorporated its recommendations into several government action plans and recent presidential decree on human rights. Our nation's democratic path is clear, but it's not over yet. My main message today is that democratic changes in my country are irreversible. Mr. President, as the member of the Council, Kazakhstan will continue to contribute to collective efforts by promoting human rights and sharing its national experience and best practices in the areas of peace building, interethnic and interreligious tolerance, disarmament, gender equality, food security, and digitalization. Taking this opportunity, I thank on behalf of my Central Asian brothers and sisters all co-sponsors of our resolution to advance education for peace and tolerance for every children. We are encouraged by the wide international support received by our region's first Council initiative. This year, Kazakhstan will also present an initiative to combat domestic violence. We invite all our partners to join us in addressing this important issue. Dear colleagues, we live in a world of unprecedented dramatic changes unseen in a century. Global stability and prosperity are being threatened by geopolitical turmoil, regional conflicts, economic uncertainty, climate change, and many other old and new challenges. They also undermine humanity's hope for the safe future. Kazakhstan shares grave concerns of the international community about ongoing wars and conflicts around the globe, including the situation in the Middle East. And we fully support each and every call by the United Nations Secretary General to put an end to all human sufferings. For us, respect for the United Nations Charter, relevant Security Council resolutions, and international law is paramount. Mr. President, the role of effective multilateral diplomacy is as crucial as ever, since no country can tackle challenges of such magnitude alone. We firmly believe that this august body, established to foster multilateral cooperation and mutual understanding, is meant to reinforce our collective efforts to build a better world during these times of geopolitical polarization. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I reaffirm Kazakhstan's commitment to work with all stakeholders in order to advance the principles enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Let us work together to respect and uphold the dignity and rights of all. I thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your declaration. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ivica Dešić, First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Serbia, by video message.
Ladies and gentlemen, the promotion and protection of human rights in the cornerstone of modern civilization. Their consistent application is a key factor of progress and a pledge for both survival and the values on which humanity is based. Deeply believing that this is the duty of each one of us, the Republic of Serbia is strongly committed to the protection and promotion of human rights as one of the foundation of our society, which is determined to live in an atmosphere of tolerance and solidarity. The world today is full of examples of violence of basic human rights. For my country, the Republic of Serbia, the tragedy that part of its population has been going through for decades in the autonomous province of Kosovo and Metohija represents a particularly painful and unacceptable example. Our people in Kosovo and Metohija have been living in an atmosphere of fear, of persecution, and violence for a quarter of a century. Serbs are systematically denied many basic human rights guaranteed by the UN Charter and other fundamental international documents, including the right to freedom of movement, to free expression and will in elections, the right to property, economic development, and even the right to life. In the territory of our southern province, the survival of one people living in their century-old ancestral homes and under threat. Therefore, no one should be surprised by the fact that amid such circumstances, the return to Kosovo and Metohija is unthinkable for more than 200,000 persons who have been internally displaced for more than 25 years, as well as that more than 14% of the remaining Serbs left the area of Kosovo and Metohija in the past year alone. In the series of continuous unilateral moves by the provisional institutions of self-government in Pristina, the latest one is the illegal decision to abolish the circulation of the Serbian currency, dinar, in the area of Kosovo and Metohija. The key goal of such moves is abundantly clear: to eradicate the Serbian population from the area of Kosovo and Metohija. We expect more attention and decisive action from the international community to the severe and prolonged discrimination against the violation of basic human rights of Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija. Ladies and gentlemen, Serbia attaches the utmost importance to promoting human rights standards and strengthening capacities for their exercise. This is done by applying an objective and non-selective approach, while strengthening the national legislation and enhancing the existing mechanisms. Furthermore, in accordance with the practice of active cooperation with the Human Rights Council, Serbia has extended a standing invitation to special procedures. Finally, I would like to emphasize once again that my country deeply believes in the importance of multilateralism and dialogue as the best way to address the multitude of challenges facing humanity in this increasingly complex international environment. We continue to firmly believe in the system of international law based on the UN Charter. We contend that the individual contribution of each country is important in this global mosaic, and the Republic of Serbia will continue to lend support to such aspiration. Thank you very much.
I thank Your Excellency for your declaration. Et maintenant, je donne la parole à son...
I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Xavier Bettel, the Vice Prime Minister of Foreign Affairs for Luxembourg, and this will be brought to us by video message as well. President, High Commissioner, Excellencies, dear friends, less than 3 months ago, we marked together the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We renewed our solemn common commitment to the universality and indivisibility of all human rights for all people everywhere. We now are clear that the rights for different people are different depending where we are: man, woman, black, white, Jewish, homosexual, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, etc., etc. The rights aren't the same all over the world for all people. And however, this promise that was at the core of our pact for the future and that we are still preparing is a message of hope for billions of humans and their civil and political rights, their economic, social, and cultural rights, their right to development, the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Currently, there are more than 50 violent conflicts raging the world over. We are far from the goals and ideals established in 1945. And the goal is to never again have war. Allow me to look at some of these conflicts in no particular order. In Israel, they're inexcusable. We see inexcusable crimes and atrocities committed by Hamas and other armed groups on 7 October. And then on the other side, after having condemned these, we also need to know that the Israeli intervention has cost tens of thousands of civilian lives. This region is suffering on both sides. This is why Luxembourg calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and an urgent increase in humanitarian aid and the immediate release of the hostages. And then the war in Ukraine. I just come from New York, where the international community marked this sad second anniversary. This war has already cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of civilians and Ukrainian civilians and Ukrainian combatants. We renew our call to Russia to immediately withdraw its troops from Ukraine, and Ukraine will be able to count on our support. We cannot accept that might makes right and such behavior among neighbors. In Sudan, millions of civilians have also been displaced, forcibly displaced, because of a conflict attributable to a reversal of constitutional order where democracy overturned. This goes against the rights of the men and women of Sudan. In Myanmar, we also have the military, again, that have perpetrated genocide against the Rohingya. And we must very clearly respond to this illegal seizure of power 3 years ago. And then also, there are other acute crises of human rights around the world: Afghanistan, Haiti, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Sahel, South Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. The Human Rights Council, of which my country is a member until the end of the year, has a role to play in recalling to the international community its obligations of solidarity and humanity, in step with its commitments in the UN. And then there is also a triple crisis on the planet. We know this. We have we are reaching the potentially irreversible climate change, and this can bring the irrevocable loss of biodiversity and pollution that is costing millions of human lives each year. And this is a crisis that threatens the entirety of humanity. And more than ever, we must support civil society and defenders of human rights and children around the world to defend these rights for future generations. I would like to pay homage to Alexei Navalny, imprisoned and tortured to death under wretched conditions. There are people like him that are the conscious of our humanity and that are worthy of our full respect and support. We also must continue to fight discrimination, gender discrimination, attacks against women and girls, LGBTI community, and other groups in a vulnerable situation. Allow me to cite at the end the strategic vision that the High Commissioner has, that is to say, precisely to respect human rights as an antidote for the crises that we face. Thank you.
Excellency Mrs. Tanja Fajon, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign and European Affairs of Slovenia, by video message.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we recently marked the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This cornerstone document paved the way for the progressive development of international human rights law and continues to do so today. When it comes to human rights, the work is never really done. Just 2 days ago, we marked the grim anniversary of Russia's unjustified and illegal aggression against Ukraine. The war is causing enormous human suffering and destruction across the entire country. Slovenia condemns this act in strongest terms and calls for accountability for human rights violations. Accountability for atrocities and violations of international human rights law is crucial. This month, on 14 February, I signed the Ljubljana, the Hague Convention on Mutual Legal Assistance and Extradition, together with the representatives of more than 30 states from around the world. I encourage all others to do the same. The latest conflict between Hamas and Israel has been raging in Gaza for 5 months, with civilians, mostly women and children, paying the highest price. Permanent and sustainable ceasefire is urgently needed to end the human suffering. International humanitarian law and human rights law must be respected. But there are many other ongoing conflicts and crises around the world that negatively affect human rights. They too require our full attention. To name but a few: Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Haiti, Iran, Mali, Myanmar, and Sudan. As a member of the UN Security Council, Slovenia attaches particular importance to the gross and systematic human rights violations and abuses in situations on the Security Council's agenda, and also focuses on the protection of civilians, especially children, and on the Women, Peace and Security agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, the Human Rights Council has many mechanisms at its disposal to respond to human rights challenges and situations around the world. There is also the indispensable work of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and his office. In order to keep our compass steady, we also need strong institutions and civil society to hold us accountable. We must therefore invest in the resilience of our societies and strengthen the social fabric, including by upholding the highest human rights standards. There should be no attacks and reprisals against human rights defenders. And speaking of our societies, a stark reminder: the backsliding on gender equality and the worsening situation of women worldwide are symptomatic of the growing disparities and inequalities within and between our societies. The empowerment and participation of women and girls at all levels should therefore remain high on our agenda. Today there are many emerging challenges that pose risks to human rights. New technologies, including artificial intelligence, climate change, pandemics and the rapid demographic changes are just the most obvious. To tackle some of them and contribute to the common good, Slovenia will continue to call for a comprehensive human rights framework for older persons as well. We are concerned about the rapid aging of the population. At the current session, Slovenia, together with a core group of countries, will present a resolution on the right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment. Together with partners, it will also table a resolution on the rights of persons belonging to minorities. As the chair of the Committee on Victim Assistance of the Anti-Personal Mine Ban Convention, Slovenia strongly advocates for the promotion of the safety, protection and full social inclusion of persons with disabilities and landmine survivors. Mr. President, as the UN reviews its vision for the future with a summit in September, we must mainstream human rights throughout the outcome document in order to ensure peace, stability and sustainable development for all. Slovenia remains committed to human rights and look forward to possibly rejoining the Human Rights Council for a third time in the 2026-2028 period. As always, we stand ready to play our part. Thank you.
أشكر معالي السيدة وزيرة الشؤون الخارجية لسلوفينيا وأعطي لمعالي السيد أيمن.
Thank you. We will now hear from Mr. Ayman Sofadi, the Vice Prime Minister of Jordan.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سعادة السفير.
On behalf of God, the Clement and the Merciful, the President of the Human Rights Council, Mr. High Commissioner for Human Rights, dear colleagues, the Palestinians breastfeeding have right to milk, but they don't have it. They have the children have the right to go to a safe school, but with Israeli occupation, they do not enjoy this right. The Palestinian people have mothers and fathers and youth. They have adults that have the right to a state that's being a right that's being violated by the Israeli state in the West Bank and in the occupied city of Jerusalem. The Palestinians endure occupation. They suffer from injustice. They go to sleep suffering from injustice, and they wake up in the same situation. They have a right to worship. They have the right to circulate. This is a human right violated by the occupation. The right to work in security, equitable due process, a field, property, a house. These are fundamental rights that are being violated by the occupying power, Israel. In Gaza, the Palestinians die as a result of attacks, cowardly attacks, death by bombing, and famine of the innocent everywhere in Gaza. There's proof of the Israeli occupation and their violation of the human rights of the Palestinians. Houses are destroyed, schools are bombed, hospitals as well. Incursions have laid waste. The Israelis have transformed the schools of some 600,000 students into shelters where people have had to go because their homes and neighborhoods have been destroyed. Since for 1,400 years, the faithful have been going to the Omar Mosque, which has been destroyed by Israel. For more than 1,600 years, prayers were heard throughout the churches of Gaza until those churches were bombed by Israel. Dear colleagues, the occupation has violated much. Its injustice has gone beyond measure. This lays bare the inequality. This unarmed population is unprotected. International humanitarian aid should be offered to all people. It should not be selective as a result of the force of the aggressor and the identity of the aggressed. The right to self-determination. We must condemn the occupation and bring to bear international law against the government that denies the Palestinian people of the right to freedom, the racists that deny the humanity of the Palestinian people, the extremists that transform Palestinian fields to illegal settlements. They turn these zones into prisons where they conduct arbitrary detention of children, allowing for the terrorism of the settlers. This must be brought to an end immediately. Those who commit crimes, war crimes against innocent civilians must be condemned. Mohammed Satorah was killed after, because of it, at 45 years of age. He was the victim of an attack that deprived him of milk and water. He died of famine. Peace, dear colleagues, cannot be restored while there is ongoing occupation. Security cannot be brought until all rights of the Palestinian people are restored. They're being trampled upon. There must be a response to support the rights of the Palestinian people. Our kingdom wants justice and the implementation of international law, peace, and security. Dear colleagues, Jordan is always committed to all international human rights mechanisms, with the UPR included. Efforts of our country will continue in the UPR to ensure that we address all harmful practices that run a counter-current to human rights for all categories of society. Reform will move forward thanks to legislative and economic and political measures aiming to bring modernization and development and a fight against all imbalances. This is an approach that Jordan pursues with clear programs and thanks to a firm resolve. The report from Jordan, submitted during our fourth UPR review before this August Council last January, lays out the challenges and the programs that are being implemented by Jordan to overcome the difficulties. We have taken stock of our laws, reviewing them, strengthening human rights within them, human rights inherent to all Jordanians. Mr. High Commissioner, thank you. President of the Human Rights Council, thank you very much for your efforts, and may God's peace be upon you. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, for these remarks.
Chenda Sofia Sok, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Cambodia, equally by video message.
Mr. President, High Commissioner, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, over the decades, the escalation of global power rivalry and conflicts in many countries have left more than a quarter of the world population living in affected areas. The life of millions of civilians have been profoundly affected. Cambodia is gravely concerned about threats to international peace and security. In response, we emphasize the critical need for peaceful dialogue and urge avoidance of actions that could precipitate severe humanitarian crisis. Armed conflict must end to preserve dignity and humanity for all. Peace and security must be restored. International cooperation and mutual trust among states must be strengthened alongside the establishment of robust international enforcement mechanisms. As the preamble of the UN Charter states, we must unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, fostering tolerance and coexistence as good neighbors. After 3 decades of civil war, Cambodia places utmost importance on peace. We support the notion that peace is the highest and most noble aspiration of humankind, which must be ardently cherished and protected. Peace is an enabling right, preconditioning the enjoyment of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights, and the achievement of sustainable development. Proper human rights and development cannot be sustained where peace is under threat or fragile. Accordingly, Cambodia has committed itself to promoting peace and security worldwide. We have dispatched 9,281 peacekeepers, including 762 women, to UN missions, protecting civilian life in 9 countries and maintaining peace and security in conflict areas. Mr. President, all human rights are organically interlinked and mutually reinforcing. Civil, political, economic, cultural, or social rights, including the right to development, must be treated fairly and equally on the same footing and with the same emphasis. In this context, our government has made significant efforts and achieved notable milestones in promoting and protecting the rights of our people. The civil political space has been strengthened and socio-economic rights have been invigorated. Furthermore, the new cabinet, formed last year, is implementing the first phase of its pentagonal strategy focusing on growth, employment, equity, efficiency, and sustainability. With enduring peace and stability, Cambodia's annual growth averaged 7% between 2005 and 2019. Poverty was reduced from 50% to 9% over the same period. Consequently, Cambodia transitioned from low income to lower middle income status. We are encouraged by a national review showing that most of the 17 SDG, along with our 18 goal of mine clearance, are on track despite global economic uncertainties. To reduce poverty, vulnerability, and inequality while boosting human development and economic growth, Cambodia has implemented wide-ranging social assistance schemes. These include a national social assistance fund that strengthens protection in response to emergencies. In July last year, Cambodia held general election. 18 political parties participated and more than 8.2 million people cast their ballots. The turnout of almost 85% was the highest since the UN-supervised election in 1993, a clear indication of our people's growing political maturity and enthusiasm for exercising their democratic rights. Thousands of observers, including 333 foreign observers from 65 countries, widely assessed the election as free, fair, credible, and just. The upcoming Senate election this month are expected to further reflect the general will of the people. Mr. President, democracy is a shared value, achieved through learning, building, and strengthening gradually, taking national characteristics and context into account. Similarly, human rights are universal values for all humanity. As Secretary General Guterres has stressed, human rights must never be a vehicle for double standards or a means to pursue hidden agendas. Regrettably, some countries have misinterpreted our application of laws designed to protect law-abiding citizens as clamp down on freedom. Paradoxically, the same measures, when applied in their own countries, are considered necessary and lawful to maintain public order, social stability, and national security. As a party to 8 out of 9 core human rights conventions, Cambodia's close and constructive cooperation with various UN mechanisms is well recognized by the Council. Last year, the royal government extended the mandate of the country's special rapporteur and renewed its MOU with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights representative. The special rapporteur has enjoyed unfettered access to Cambodia, including meetings with several government leaders, including the Prime Minister. This year, Cambodia is scheduled to engage in constructive dialogues under the fourth cycle of the Universal Periodic Review and with the Committee on Enforced Disappearances. Mr. President, our engagement with the international community and all human rights mechanisms is a two-way process. The agenda must be approached through a genuine dialogue-based method, emphasizing non-confrontation, non-politicization, and non-selectivity. Assessment should be fair, balanced, and objective, fully observing the code of conduct. Preconceived prejudice, prejudgment, or bias will only lead to a loss of credibility and erosion of mutual trust and cooperation. To conclude, Cambodia remains resolute in our firm commitment to cooperate with all stakeholders to further promote and protect human rights within the framework of the rule of law and accountable institutions. We also remain firmly committed to advancing sustainable development and pursuing our irreversible democratic journey with pluralism. I thank you for your attention.
I thank Your Excellency. Et maintenant, je donne la parole à son Excellency.
And I give the floor to His Excellency, Edouard Rodrigue Bayala, Minister of Justice and Human Rights of Burkina Faso. That's a video message.
Monsieur le Président du Conseil,
President of the Human Rights Council, High Commissioner of Human Rights, ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegation, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honour to address you during the high-level segment of the 55th session of the Human Rights Council on behalf of my country, Burkina Faso. I extend my congratulations to His Excellency, Mr. Omar Znimer, PR of Morocco, to UNOG for his outstanding election as President of the Council in 2024. Wishing every success in discharging your mandate, my delegation would assure you of its willingness to fully cooperate with the Council. Allow me also to welcome in particular the good cooperation between Burkina Faso and OHCHR through its country office in Burkina. Sir, Burkina notes with satisfaction progress made in promoting and protecting human rights throughout the world. However, the quality of sound, unfortunately, of the video is not sufficient to be able to properly interpret. Apologies.
en effet, la situation sécuritaire marquée par la récurrence des attaques terroristes, particulièrement dans le Sahel, demeure une préoccupation majeure pour le Burkina Faso. Ces attaques terroristes contre les populations civiles, les forces armées nationales, les forces de sécurité intérieure ainsi que les volontaires pour la défense de la patrie constituent des atteintes aux droits humains et occasionnent une crise humanitaire sans précédent. Face à ces constats, le Burkina Faso a opéré des réformes majeures lui permettant de concilier les impératifs de lutte contre le terrorisme avec ses obligations en matière de promotion et de protection des droits humains. Au nombre de ces mesures, il convient de relever l'adoption du décret portant mobilisation générale et mise en garde, adopté après un avis favorable du Conseil constitutionnel. Ce décret autorise le gouvernement sur une période de 12 mois, à compter du 19 avril 2023, à requérir les personnes, les biens et les services indispensables dans les dispositifs opérationnels de sécurisation intégrale du territoire. Monsieur le Président, au Burkina Faso, la lutte contre le terrorisme passe également par la poursuite de la lutte contre la pauvreté et la promotion d'un développement partagé. C'est pourquoi, dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre du plan d'action pour la stabilisation et le développement de la transition, des initiatives de développement endogènes, telles que l'Agence pour la promotion de l'entrepreneuriat communautaire, ont été mises en place. Dans la même dynamique, le gouvernement burkinabé veille particulièrement au financement des projets des jeunes, ainsi qu'à l'autosuffisance alimentaire à travers l'initiative présidentielle pour la production agricole 2023-2024, qui mobilise 3 000 militaires et 4 000 personnes déplacées internes. Monsieur le Président, le Burkina Faso tient à rassurer la communauté internationale sur sa ferme volonté de respecter ses engagements internationaux en matière de promotion et de protection des droits humains en dépit des défis liés au terrorisme et à la crise humanitaire qui en découle. Dans cette dynamique, le 6 novembre 2023, Le groupe de travail de l'EPU a examiné le 4e rapport du Burkina Faso. Le document final de cet examen contenant la position officielle sur l'ensemble des recommandations sera adopté au cours de la présente session. Le gouvernement burkinabé veillera à la mise en œuvre des recommandations acceptées à l'issue de cette revue en tant que repère de la poursuite de son action en faveur des droits humains. En outre, les 20 et 21 février 2024, le Burkina Faso a présenté au comité des disparitions forcées les renseignements complémentaires en vertu de l'article 29, paragraphe 4 de la Convention contre les disparitions forcées. Monsieur le Président, pour terminer, le Burkina Faso voudrait simplement réaffirmer ici sa foi au multilatéralisme. Il demeure convaincu que le Conseil des droits de l'homme est la tribune appropriée pour discuter de la situation des droits humains dans le monde. Il est temps que l'ensemble de la communauté internationale s'engage en faveur d'une coopération franche et sincère, dynamique et respectueuse de la souveraineté des États. C'est seulement à ce prix que nous parviendrons tous à garantir l'effectivité des droits humains et le développement durable à toutes les nations. Je vous remercie.
Je remercie votre Excellence.
I thank Your Excellency.
His Excellency Mrs. Elina Valtonen, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Finland. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished participants, it is an honor to address the Human Rights Council. As a Council Bureau member, you can count on Finland's commitment to promote the universality of human rights in cooperation with everyone. Mr. President, the wars and conflicts we are witnessing around the world are killing and traumatizing not only adults, but what is worst, also children. Abusive governments curtail individual freedoms. 2024 is a record year for elections, but many of them are anything but free. Rule by law is replacing the rule of law. Yet we must not succumb to despair. Late Nobel laureate Martti Ahtisaari wisely worked on the premise that peace is a question of will. Fulfilling human rights is also a question of will. The UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights obligate us. They guide us to the realization of human rights, democracy, rule of law, and gender equality for everyone, everywhere. This Council has a solid record of showing determination. Finland works with all stakeholders to support those who yearn for freedom and dignity, those whose rights are violated, and those who defend the rights of others. Mr. President, Ukrainians heroically defend their freedom in the face of Russia's war of aggression. The Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine has documented evidence that Russian authorities have committed war crimes, including willful killing, torture, rape, and deportation of children to Russia. Russia has shown no willingness to end its aggression or to take responsibility for the crimes committed. Ukraine, by contrast, fully cooperates with the Commission and addresses any wrongdoings by its own ranks. It is vital that the Council renews the mandate of the Commission and holds Russia accountable. Mr. President, there are no safe places in Gaza. The suffering of civilians is unbearable. They need life-saving aid now. This conflict severely traumatizes an entire generation of children. We plead Israel not to take military action in Rafah. The findings of the recent report by the UN Human Rights Office are deeply concerning. Nothing justifies the brutal terrorist attacks by Hamas against civilians. Hamas must release all remaining hostages immediately and without conditions. For the sake of civilians in Gaza, I strongly support the call of the High Commissioner that Israel must comply with the legally binding orders issued by the International Court of Justice and with the full span of international humanitarian law. I hope this Council will engage all stakeholders to support efforts for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, address violations by all parties, and forge a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Mr. President, in addition to Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, we are deeply concerned about the grim situation in Russia. Russian authorities have systematically stripped people of their fundamental rights, including free expression and peaceful assembly. They are also responsible for the recent death of Alexei Navalny, who sacrificed his life in arbitrary imprisonment for democracy. While there are no free and fair elections in sight, we must not forget about the numerous other political prisoners in Russia and its accomplice, Belarus. Finland will continue to call for the respect for human rights globally, including in Sudan, Yemen, Afghanistan, Iran, Myanmar, and Nicaragua. We call on China to enter into dialogue with the international community on human rights in China. We have followed with concern how the repressive action by authorities in China and security laws in Hong Kong have further limited the civic space. The situation of ethnic and religious communities, including the Muslim Uyghurs, continues to require our attention. Mr. President, the resilience of human rights defenders worldwide is admirable. They speak for justice and gender equality, for equal rights of all LGBTIQ+ persons and against racism. They also fight against anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred. The Council should embrace them as companions in building democratic and flourishing societies. Their work and that of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights give us hope for a better future. Where there is a will, there is a way. Thank you so much.
I thank Your Excellency for your declaration. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Bui Tan Son, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Vietnam.
Mr. President, distinguished participants, last year we commemorated the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 30th anniversary of the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action. Yet humanity faced multiple increasingly complex challenges from strategic competition, armed conflicts, climate change, energy food insecurity, and social inequalities. Last year alone, more than 170,000 lives were lost to conflicts. Between 2020 and 2023, 165 million people fell into poverty. At present, nearly 300 million people need humanitarian assistance and protection. In this generally gloomy picture, we still can see some bright spots. There are also many success stories. Southeast Asia remains a region of peace and dynamic development. Despite global headwinds, in 2023, Vietnam's economic growth reached over 5%. Poverty rate was further reduced to 3%. Social security spending continues to be at high priority and has been maintained at nearly 3% of GDP for many years. In 2023, Vietnam continued to export over 8 million tons of rice, helping ensure food security and the right to food for millions in different regions of the world. What we have learned over the years is that human rights of our people can be best served when there are peace, stability, and respect for international law, and where the state puts people at the center of all of its policies to ensure inclusive and sustainable development. This is also true at the global level to promote the enjoyment of all human rights for all. The Human Rights Council should be a part of this larger process. It should focus on priorities that matter the most to the people, such as full enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights, including the right to development, the protection of vulnerable groups. It should call on states to exercise mutual respect and understanding, to promote tolerance, inclusion, unity, and respect for diversity, and to pursue dialogue and cooperation in ensuring all human rights for all as prescribed by Resolution 52/19. Mr. President, as a member of the Council and main sponsor of the said resolution, Vietnam has and will continue to work with all member states to promote that cause. Vietnam will also continue with the priorities and commitments we have set, in particular, the protection of vulnerable groups, gender equality, human rights, and digital transformation. Later this year, Vietnam, together with Bangladesh and the Philippines, will present a draft annual resolution on the promotion and protection of human rights in the context of climate change to the 56th session. Last but not least, as part of its obligation, Vietnam has submitted its report under the 4th UPR cycle with nearly 90% of recommendations fully implemented, including a recent visit to Vietnam by the Special Rapporteur on the right to the development. We look forward to the constructive engagement of states and all relevant stakeholders in this review. Given our strong commitment to promoting and protecting human rights, to furthering the work of the Council, Vietnam has decided to put forward its candidacy for the term 2026-2028. Let me conclude, Mr. President, by reiterating our determination to contribute to global peace, development, and all human rights for all. Thank you for your attention.
I thank Your Excellency for your declaration. Je donne maintenant la parole à son Excellence.
Give the floor now to His Excellency, Mr. Lejeune Mbella Mbella, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Cameroon. Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, allow me warmly congratulate the new President of the Human Rights Council, His Excellency Omar Niper, on his remarkable election to chair this prestigious and strategic UN body. I would like to assure him of the total support of my delegation. May I also take this opportunity to congratulate His Excellency Volker Türk, High Commissioner for Human Rights, on the outstanding organization of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs, les 75 ans de la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme marquent certes un jalon significatif.
Marks a significant milestone, but it also reminds us of the magnitude of the challenges that persist with respect to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Cameroon is committed, under the leadership of the head of state, His Excellency Paul Biya, to contribute, to work actively in the context of international dialogue, to find and implement concerted solutions to the complex challenges that our world faces. We reiterate, therefore, our commitment to democracy, the rule of law, and social inclusion. We firmly believe that socio-cultural diversity, both religious and linguistic, that characterize our nation constitute a richness, an asset that must be preserved and leveraged. It is consistent with the commitment of the head of state of Cameroon in the ongoing quest for lasting solutions to the socio-political crises in the regions of the northwest and southwest of Cameroon, to maintain a united, indivisible Cameroon, one rich in its diversity, one that is prosperous. It's an opportunity for us to reiterate our gratitude to all our bilateral and multilateral partners who support us in this endeavor to preserve and restore peace and national unity. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we have tirelessly reiterated from this same rostrum, Cameroon is committed to stepping up its efforts to meeting the ongoing challenges in promoting and protecting human rights. We will continue to cooperate with all UN mechanisms dedicated to that end, particularly with the special rapporteurs and the treaty bodies, to enhance and strengthen ever further our governance in the field, inter alia, through the ratification of international instruments and the modernization of our legal and institutional framework. Moreover, the granting by my country of premises free of charge to host the regional office of OHCHR for Central Africa is part of this process. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, my country went through its 4th UPR in November. It was an opportunity for us to take stock together on the progress made by Cameroon in the sphere of protecting and promoting human rights over the previous 4 years. I take this opportunity to thank all countries who were kind enough to make observations and recommendations on Cameroon's report. It reflects unquestionably the interest that you have in my country. I'd also like to thank the High Commissioner for Human Rights for agreeing to support my country in implementing the recommendations stemming from that UPR. Finally, as we are all preparing to take part in the upcoming Summit of the Future, I can assure all friendly countries and all the partners represented here of Cameroon's determination to contribute to building a rejuvenated, reinvigorated multilateral system based on shared values for the greatest possible benefit of our populations. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, these are the values that my country intends to promote and champion as when presiding, thanks to your unanimous support of the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly.
All for your kind attention.
I thank Your Excellency, Minister Lejeune Belambela from Cameroon, for your declaration. And now I give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Tobias Billström, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden, by video message.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to address you today. The Human Rights Council is meeting at a time when human rights are severely challenged as norms and in practice. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights set out to protect the unifying vision of respect for fundamental rights and freedoms for all. The greatness of the human rights vision and the reason its impact has been so enormous is that it puts the individual human person at the center. But it establishes that the ultimate duty of the state is to respect the rights of the individual without discrimination, to protect these rights against abuse, and to ensure that everyone's basic human needs are fulfilled so that the potential of every individual can be fully realized. The human rights movement is a movement for freedom in the deepest possible sense. Its goal is to ensure that every one of us can flourish fully in all our diversity. But the international human rights system is not just a vision. It's also a blueprint for how that vision can be achieved. It sets up a system with individuals as right holders and states as duty bearers accountable for violations. It has inspired an expanding infrastructure for accountability at the national, regional, and international level. Sweden accepts scrutiny of our own record and is always ready to engage in dialogue on our human rights obligations. Later this session, we will hear a report of a special rapporteur on freedom of religion and belief, who we welcomed to Sweden last year. Yet even as we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights a few months ago, we know that this system is being undermined. Russia's ruthless aggression against Ukraine, in blatant violation of international law and the UN Charter, is an obvious and horrific example. We are witnessing efforts to weaken accountability, to dilute and divert the obligations of states. We are seeing an increase in extrajudicial executions, torture, sexual and gender-based violence, efforts to turn back the clock on gender equality, the rights of LGBTQ+ persons, and sexual and reproductive rights. Harassment of human rights defenders and NGOs. A few days ago, we heard the appalling news of the death of one of the bravest voices of his generation, Alexei Navalny. The Russian authorities are responsible for his death. His work for democracy will carry on. We see the shrinking of civic space, the suppression of independent media and judiciaries. Not long ago, I met with Belarusian civil society activists who spoke to me of their hopes for democracy and human rights. Hopes curtailed but shared by human rights defenders in all too many countries in the world. And in too many countries, we witness arbitrary detentions. I am firmly committed to securing the release of Swedish citizens arbitrarily imprisoned for political reasons. Our efforts on their behalf will not stop. And most alarming of all, we are witnessing more armed conflicts than at any time since 1945. This calls on us to respect human rights and international law in conflict. The horrific attacks by Hamas against Israel on the 7th of October caused civilian deaths, appalling sexual crimes, and ongoing violations against the hostages, who must be released without conditions. Together with our partners in the EU, Sweden recognizes Israel's right to defend itself within the scope of international law. I have called from the start of this conflict for respect for international humanitarian law. We see an appalling civilian toll in Gaza, including on children. The high number of civilian casualties in Gaza raises serious questions about the respect for international humanitarian law. These norms must be respected. Mr. President, the international human rights system is one of humanity's greatest achievements, and it requires our sustained support in order to continue to function. It needs us to speak up in its defense when it is challenged. Sweden will continue to stand together with all our global partners who stand ready to tackle this challenge, because we are convinced that only a world that respects human rights can deliver a sustainable and prosperous future. In these times of conflict, polarization and crisis, there is simply no acceptable alternative. Thank you.
I thank Your Excellency for your declaration, and now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Hussein Amir Abdullahian, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really pleased to share with you, Excellencies, some points about human rights and their importance. And this very high-level meeting of the Human Rights Council meeting on behalf of the Islamic Republic of Iran now, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Islamic Republic of Iran remains steadfast in adhering to and respecting human rights and dignity based on its national cultural values and the Islamic teaching. Unfortunately, the realization of the lofty goals of human rights is faced with some trying challenges, the most urgent of which is the systematic and widespread human slaughtering by the world's only apartheid regime, that is, the occupying, warmongering regime of Israel. Indeed, one must admit that the world is facing the most reprehensible moral and humanitarian crisis, which is the result of 80 years of unconditional support for and condoning the colonial occupation and the continuous violation of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. During the past 140 days alone, more than 100,000 human beings have been slaughtered or injured or buried under rubble in Gaza. And those who happen to be alive there are facing an imminent death from starvation and infectious diseases. Dear friends, let's resolve in this important session today to not allow genocide and other atrocities become banal and normalized. I draw your attention to the recent report of the Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, which demonstrates the depth and gravity of the crimes and gross violations of human rights in Gaza and the West Bank. Today, the world is witnessing the maximum support for the Israeli atrocities by the United States of America and Canada and the UK and some of its other allies that make them complicit to the ongoing crime of genocide. The Human Rights Council must hold the Zionist regime and its supporters accountable for the atrocity crimes committed in the occupied Palestine. Mr. President, I must say loud and clear that the human rights record is now stained and even tainted due to the atrocity perpetrated against Palestinian women and girls in Gaza and the West Bank. And this is still going on. If we are to restore the integrity and credibility of human rights mechanisms, we need to end the Palestinian genocide by stopping the occupying regime from further aerial bombardment and ground and sea offensive against Gaza and Rafah, as well as systematic starvation of the Palestinian people. Ladies and gentlemen, we would not forget what cries were raised in this place more than a year ago following the tragic death of a dear Iranian girl that saddened everyone in Iran, and a special so-called fact-finding committee was set up for that purpose. But today, no meaningful action is taken by the UN system in response to the mass killing of thousands of women and girls in Gaza. I should reiterate that imposing such procedures against my country under the pretext of fact-finding, while there are effective national mechanisms in place, is void of any logical, legal, or legitimate basis. It is only another instance of instrumentalization of human rights mechanisms for political purposes. Mr. President, the sinister and dangerous phenomenon of terrorism and extremism continues to claim innocent victims. The Islamic Republic of Iran, as a country that has been at the forefront of the fight against terrorist groups and sacrificed many lives for that cause, has always stressed the need for effective international cooperation against terrorism as a global threat in an effective way as a prevalent international threat. Ladies and gentlemen, unilateral coercive measures continue to systematically violate fundamental human rights in the targeted countries and render serious harm to people. Imposing unilateral sanctions against nations is an unlawful and internationally wrongful act that amount to a crime against humanity. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would like to stress that the Islamic Republic of Iran's policy of interaction and dialogue, including in the field of human rights, is unwavering. We would utilize all our national capacities to protect and promote human rights based on our Constitution, especially in the field of human rights. And we would utilize all our national capacities to protect and promote human rights based on our Constitution, as well as our international legal obligations and Islamic and religious teachings, and we will spare no efforts in this regard. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Excellency Mrs. Retno Lestari Priyansari Marsudi, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Indonesia.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, I just finished visiting The Hague, where I delivered Indonesia oral statement at the advisory opinion hearing in the ICJ. People in Gaza continue to suffer because of the double standard, especially in the context of human rights. Today marks the 143rd day of Israel onslaught in Gaza and of the United Nations failure to do what it is designed to do. For the third time, yet another Security Council resolution on Gaza was vetoed. The Human Rights Council should do what it is designed to do, to address the gross violation of human rights, including in Gaza, including in Palestine. Colleagues, maybe I missed it. I didn't hear any single word on Gaza by the High Commissioner of Human Rights during his statement at the opening session. Maybe I just missed it. All of us, the global community, has to stand firm for this cause. Human rights must also be at the center of the Palestinian solution. The Council must therefore lead transformative action through three approaches. First, strengthen ecosystem for human rights. This is our collective responsibility to do so. On Indonesia's part, during its chairmanship, ASEAN pledged to enhance human rights cooperation through the Leaders' Declaration on ASEAN Human Rights Dialogue. Promoting inclusive societies and nation building is very important, including in Afghanistan through the promotion of women and girls' right to education. We must invest in human rights. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and crucial mechanisms like the Commission of Inquiry on the OPT must be adequately funded. We must continue to support this Council to provide technical assistance and capacity building in strengthening national capacities. Second, intensify our effort to address humanitarian crisis. Wars and conflict have triggered a massive displacement crisis. This call for the international cooperation and solidarity and fulfillment of the obligation outlined in the Refugee Convention. Moreover, humanitarian mechanism must be strengthened and not be politicized. We cannot remain silent on the suspension of funding to UNRWA while funds to support war crimes in Gaza continue unabated. We cannot also lose sight of those who are impacted by economic downturns and climate change. We need more investment to ensure social safety nets and mitigation projects. Third, human rights must be protected and promoted on equal footing. This includes the need to respect right to development of every nation, to guarantee the well-being of the people, and enable the achievement of sustainable development goals. Collaboration should be aimed at safeguarding the right of persons in vulnerable situations, in particular women and girls, and also persons with disabilities and migrants. Mr. President, rest assured, as a member of Human Rights Council, Indonesia will place this concern at the forefront of our priorities. And to conclude, let us recommit ourselves to a world where justice, is not selective, and human rights are upheld for all. Human rights are upheld for all. I thank you very much.
I thank Your Excellency for your declaration, and now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Luis Gilberto Murillo Urrutia, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Colombia.
Su Excelencia, Your Excellency, Ambassador Omar Sneibet, President of the Human Rights Council, honorable dignitaries, ministers, members of the Human Rights Council, representatives of civil society, those present, esteemed guests. Colombia has the objective of becoming a power of life. Our progressive foreign policy of the government of President Gustavo Petro is focused on three pillars: diplomacy for life, life diplomacy, diplomacy for life, nature, and a response to climate change, and also the promotion and strengthening and deepening of democracy in a turbulent world beset by numerous conflicts that disproportionately affect the lives of millions of people. We have sought to build peace beyond our borders. And this, obviously, in a framework of inclusion and social justice. We know that dialogue, social justice, and a respect for human rights are essential when it comes to life with dignity. An important role is played by the Office of Human Rights of the United Nations, and likewise the Human Rights Council. We see this in the progress Colombia has made. I would like to underscore, first, the visit to Colombia of at least 5 special procedures in the course of 2024. This is unprecedented over the last decade. Secondly, a resolution was adopted in 2023 in this council. Through this, we see a strengthening of technical assistance and cooperation for the implementation of our peace accords. These were signed in our country in 2017. And third, there is also the mandate of the expert Antonia Riojola when it comes to detecting and the obstacles for the comprehensive implementation of the peace accords. We very much hope for these results. We await them with particular attention. We have targeted our actions along 4 cross-cutting pillars in the human rights agenda. First, the development of a strengthened peace agenda, decided leadership in a global drug policy, and an agenda aimed at preserving biodiversity while paying attention to climate change. This is ratified with our decision to become the headquarters, or rather host, for the COP16 of the Convention on Biodiversity and Biological Diversity. We await you in the city of Cali, Colombia. Each and every one of you are cordially invited. And lastly, cooperation efforts and development efforts for the creation and fostering of capacities throughout our territories. This capacity building involves a territorial transformation, ensuring the rights of the victims of the conflict, as well as working hand in hand with the guarantees of non-repetition. The youth is playing a crucial role in our new policy decisions. It is thus that, for the first time, we are putting together a plan for youth peace and security. We are doing so with the support of the United Nations. This will allow us to strengthen the role of society in the building of a better world. Today, we are aware that complying with the international commitments in the area of human rights includes a full guarantees for the rights of population groups that have been historically or socially unfavored. We call for a prioritizing and guaranteeing of the rights of children, boys and girls, adolescents, and youth on the whole. It is for this reason that we call for a fight to eliminate all forms of violence against children. I would like to invite you to the first ministerial conference aimed at putting an end to violence against children. This will be held in Colombia in November of this year. Likewise, we invite countries to promote a feminist foreign policy in bilateral scenarios and in multilateral scenarios. This would put a gender-based focus on the work promoting the participation of women of all stripes in these scenarios. As a pluri-ethnic and multicultural society, we have renewed discussions for the elimination of all forms of discrimination affecting Afro-descendant peoples, indigenous peoples, and campesino populations throughout our country. We consider it essential that we see an initiative in the United Nations on the promotion and full respect for the rights of Afro-descendant peoples. With the pressing need to bolster the human rights protection system, we propose the convening of a third global conference to give ongoing effort in the area of human rights, to continue with that done in 1968 and in Vienna in 1993. Along these lines, we invite you as well to support Colombia in its goal to join the Human Rights Council. We are promoting our candidacy, and we invite countries to support our candidacy. Colombia has a great deal to contribute in peace building. We are an example of this, a paradigm. We invite the entirety of the international community to strengthen and modernize the United Nations system. We should do so based on a sincere and democratic dialogue between the South, the global South, and the North. This in step with the principles of the United Nations Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Thank you kindly.
I thank Your Excellency for your declaration. Excellencies, dear participants, distinguished delegates, this was the last speaker on the list for this meeting. We will now take a short technical break of 2 or 3 minutes before reconvening to continue with the high-level segment. Thus, I hereby close this first meeting of the 55th session of the Human Rights Council.